Hey Aptera fans, I've got an exciting update to share to my Aptera Solar Calculator. The big change with this new version 3 is that it's now entirely browser-based, which means there is no software to install unlike the previous versions which ran inside Blender. This is going to make it a lot more accessible for everyone since it now runs on all PCs and tablets, and even from your phone. There are other great new features as well that make the calculator even more accurate and more fun to use. You can now simulate power generation with the rear hatch closed or open, or what the Aptera team called solar maxing. And there's a new visual power output chart, which shows the solar energy bell curve across the day. This latest version uses the same detailed cell-level calculations that were in the previous version, and there are still user-configurable inputs for system efficiency and ambient light, allowing you to fine-tune the calculation. In this video, we'll cover how to use the calculator and also validate the accuracy of the output by comparing against the recent solar performance validation data posted by Aptera Motors. For those of you who are new to this topic, let's first examine the Aptera's unique solar footprint and why this solar calculator is more useful for the Aptera than other solar calculators out there. The others, which are used primarily for residential solar, are designed to work for solar arrays that are flat and mostly aligned in a single direction. Because the Aptera solar cells fit around the curved surface of the vehicle, every cell faces a different direction, making the solar string calculation much more complex. The incidence angle of the sun, which is a key metric in determining solar output, is not just one angle, but a multitude of angles, so it's important that we analyze each individual solar cell on the vehicle in order to determine an accurate energy measurement. Also, the Aptera can be driven and parked in any direction. This calculator makes it easy to compare different angles and determine which is the most optimal for your situation. Let's take a look at the new interface. To launch the calculator, go to experienceaptera.com and find the Solar Calculator section. Click the button for Solar Calculator to bring up the calculator in your browser. All the controls are available on the left side in this scrollable panel and are very similar to the previous version. The location section is where you'll input your latitude and longitude information for where you want to run the simulation. The date-time section is pretty self-explanatory. The visualization controls section controls the 3D viewport on the right side of the screen, where you see the vehicle, the compass direction, the sun position, cast shadows, and a new energy chart for plotting the power output throughout the day. Everything in the 3D viewport is controlled by the various sliders on the left. The position of the sun in the sky is controlled by the time slider. You can change the sun distance with this slider and the scale of the overall scene with this slider. To rotate the entire scene, use this slider. And to rotate only the vehicle, use this slider. There is a new vehicle section here where you can choose from several different vehicle configurations, either with the rear hatch closed or with the rear hatch open in what Aptera calls solar maxing. The idea here is that by parking with the hatch open, you're able to have more solar cells facing the sun for certain parts of the day. Maybe not something you want to do every day, but useful for when you want to charge as quickly as possible from sunshine alone. There are also versions of the Aptera with different quantities of solar cells. The ones labeled with 183 cells are the early validation vehicles that have 183 solar cells in total. The ones labeled with 199 cells are for the updated rear hatch with 16 extra solar cells, which equates to 199 solar cells in total. We'll talk about that more in a minute. In the solar output section, you'll find parameters that are important to the calculation, along with some buttons to run your simulations. Keep in mind that the defaults for these user input parameters at this point are only my estimates since Aptera Motors has not publicly shared this information. They represent my best estimate based on my own testing and by comparing to the Aptera Solar test data that has been available publicly up to this point. The inputs include percent values for overall system losses and ambient light, along with a new one for additional solar dash losses, which has been added to this version to increase the accuracy by taking into account the loss introduced by sunlight passing through the windshield before hitting the solar cells on the dash. At the very bottom, there is a button to a user guide, and also a button that takes you to the official Aptera website order page and save you $30 off an Aptera reservation using my referral code. So if you or someone you know is planning to purchase an Aptera vehicle, click that button and save $30 off the regular reservation price of $100. And you'll pay only $70 to place a fully refundable pre-order for an Aptera. If you watched my previous video where I validated the calculator against some real-world data points obtained at CES 2025 for the vehicle in full sun and full shade, you should know that the solar configuration has changed since that time. Based on the recent statements, the Aptera is now using the latest Maxeon Gen 7 solar cells, which have a higher output than the Gen 3 cells used last year. Also, the total number of solar cells has increased to 199 on their latest generation of solar panels. The first 5 validation vehicles built debuted with only 183 cells, although on June 8th, Aptera posted a photo of the rear hatch with 16 additional cells on the rear hatch. So the latest expectations is that the production vehicle will have 199 cells, although Aptera Motors has not confirmed this. If information is released from Aptera indicating further changes, this calculator will be updated, but in the meantime, both the 183-cell version and 199-cell version can be modeled with this calculator. We know that Aptera Motors is actively testing and validating their solar output using their validation builds. They released a video and full set of real-world testing data on June 25th that covers 5 different solar charging scenarios, which achieve their goal of over 40 miles per day at 10 miles per kilowatt hour. This is a huge win for Aptera, assuming that their vehicle efficiency numbers hold true to their projections. In addition to these results, there is some very useful data posted to X at the end of May by Steve Fambro. In one post, Steve shared a snapshot of each solar string power generation throughout a full day, along with a photo of which direction the Aptera was facing. In another LinkedIn post by an Aptera employee, we see where in the parking lot this testing is taking place. Even though some details were not provided, we'll use all this data to do some useful calibration of the calculator. In this video, I'll attempt to 1. Determine relatively accurate parameters for system losses, additional dash losses, and ambient light, and 2. Show that the calculator output can match the actual output charts that Aptera has released. The goal being to make the calculator as accurate as possible and make it a useful tool for you to use to see how much solar power the Aptera can generate at your geographic location, as well as determining the optimal position to park the vehicle on any day of the year. Before we jump into using the calculator, I'll share with you how I determined the initial input values to use, starting with the percent value for ambient light. This is what the calculator will assume is the cell output when it's shaded, or in other terms, collecting non-direct sunlight as a percentage of full sun standard test conditions. To do this, I used a single solar cell connected to a multimeter and took test readings in unfiltered direct sun to get a baseline. I then shaded the cell and took another reading. This was done around noon in order to simulate standard test conditions for the cell. Comparing the 2 readings resulted in the shaded, or ambient light, being approximately 5% of the direct sunlight value, so I'm setting the percent ambient light parameter in the calculator to 5.0. I conducted a similar test using a single solar cell for determining the impact of a vehicle windshield on the solar dash. I took a test reading in unfiltered direct sun, and then again through a windshield, being careful to point the cell in the same direction for both conditions. Comparing the 2 values, I measured a 60% loss caused by sunlight being obstructed by the windshield. This is not a perfect test, as we don't know what differences exist between this windshield and the one Aptera is using, but it does get us in the ballpark, and we'll adjust this further when we compare to Aptera's actuals. We'll start by setting the percent additional solar dash losses value to 60.0. For the percent system losses parameter, we'll start with the value used in my previous video after CES 2025 of 14%. Next, let's run a simulation that attempts to match the data posted on X, and we can use this dataset to fine-tune the input parameters if necessary. The first step is to enter your location. The default latitude and longitude is the location of Aptera Motors in Carlsbad, California, but you can enter values for any location on Earth. If you're going to use a different location, the easiest way to do that is to search for a location in Google Maps and right-click on the location to get the latitude and longitude. For this example, we'll keep the default Carlsbad location since that is where the test was done. It's also important to set the UTC zone for the location and to check the daylight savings time checkbox if that applies to your particular location and date. By the way, any location values or other settings that you adjust in the calculator will be stored in a client cookie, so it will persist between browser sessions. The second step is to choose the date for the simulation. We know that the X post was created on May 26th, so it's likely that the test was shortly before that. We'll choose May 25th, which should be close enough for this analysis. Sunrise on May 25th in Carlsbad was 5:43 a.m. and sunset was 7:49 p.m. So we'll adjust the start time in the calculator for 5:43 a.m. The next step is to set the compass direction of the vehicle. If we look closely at the photos posted, we can discern exactly where in the parking lot and which direction the Aptera was facing. Notice that in this photo, the vehicle is lined up in the parking spot, which if we match it up to a map of the parking lot, we can see that the vehicle was facing northeast. So we'll adjust the slider in the calculator to align the vehicle facing northeast or 45 degrees off north. You can adjust the other sliders in this section to your preference, but one that's important is to position the scene so you can clearly see if any shadows are falling on the solar dash. This is the one detail that must be observed manually, and you'll need to select the Include Solar Dash checkbox only when the dash is in full sunlight. If even only one cell is shaded, it will affect the output of the entire dash solar string. So you should uncheck the control Include Solar Dash for that situation. This will force the calculator to use ambient light only for the dash string. In the accompanying photo, we can clearly see that the test used the rear hatch panel with a lower cell count. So the vehicle we'll choose will be the Aptera 183 cell. To calculate the amount of solar power generated at a specific time of day, you use the Calculate KW button. But we want to calculate a full day of solar power, so we'll use the Calculate Daily Kilowatt Hour button. As in previous versions, you need to check the Include Solar Dash checkbox only when the dash is in full sunlight. If it is partially or fully shaded, the checkbox should be unchecked. At sunrise, the dash is fully shaded, so we need to uncheck the box. Each click of the Calculate Daily Kilowatt Hour button calculates the instantaneous kilowatt power for each of the strings and reports the values here in the control panel, as well as the new power chart overlaid in the 3D scene. Each click of the button also moves the clock forward by 1 hour, turning the number in kilowatt hours. Continue clicking this button, checking for full sun on the dash, and checking the Include Solar Dash checkbox during those hours, and unchecking in the evening when shade returns to the dash, and the kilowatt hours will accumulate throughout the day. Once you've reached the end of the daylight hours, you see the bell-shaped energy curves in the power chart. The total kilowatt hours for the entire vehicle are represented by the green bars, and the individual strings are represented by the colored lines. By clicking these boxes in the control panel, you can hide each individual series of data, and when the total is not shown, the scale will adjust to make the individual string chart lines easier to read. Let's compare the output to Aptera's charts. For this initial run, we can see that the calculator is showing individual string curves that very closely match the curves of the Aptera actuals. To make it easier to compare, I put the output values into a spreadsheet and formatted the charts to be more similar to each other. For instance, you can see how the hood string drops off significantly in the afternoon, which the calculator output matches extremely well. You can also see that the peak output of each of the roof and hatch strings relative to each other matches very well with the calculator strings. Even the time of day matches for peak output matches between the two data sets. This tells us that the overall logic of the calculator is conceptually correct, although what doesn't match is the peak kilowatt hours produced. For instance, the calculated values are consistently a few percent higher across the board for all strings. Fortunately, we can adjust the total output of the calculator by tuning the percent efficiency loss input value. To drop the calculated output, we will increase this loss percentage number and see if we can better match the actuals data. So I'll increase it from 14% to 20% and rerun the simulation. I'll reset the calculated output, go back to the beginning of the day, and rerun through the daily calculation. I'll speed this up for purposes of this video. And here's the new output with a 20% efficiency loss value. You can see that all the strings now match the peak output exactly, with the exception of the dash string. Since this string is affected by the sunlight going through the windshield, we have a separate percent loss for this one string. We initially set it to 60%, but since it's a little low compared to the actuals, we'll adjust it up to 40%. Let's rerun the numbers and check the output. With the latest run, all strings now match, so we can be pretty comfortable with the input parameters of 20%, 40%, and 5%, and I'm setting the default values for the calculator to this set of numbers. We don't know what the cloud conditions were like on the day of the test, but since the charts don't show any sharp drop-offs, we can probably safely assume it was a relatively clear day. Now that we have established relatively accurate input parameters, let's see if we can match one of the recent solar validation test results that were published. We'll compare to the test that was run on June 19th that had a daily output of 4.4 kilowatt hours. In this test, there was morning clouds that reduced the output until about 10 a.m. By measuring the graph, it appears that the output was reduced by about 30%. We can simulate this in the calculator by adjusting the percent system losses value by increasing this number by 30%, or from 20% to 50% during the hours of cloudy conditions, then changing it back to 20% for the rest of the day. We'll start by setting the date to June 19th and the start time to 7 a.m., which matches the actuals data. This test states that the vehicle was facing west during the morning and switched to facing east in the afternoon. So we'll start the simulation with the vehicle facing west also. The validation results don't specify which rear hatch was used, but since it was done after June 8th, which we know was when the new hatch was available, we'll assume that the proper vehicle to choose should be the Aptera 199 cell. We'll start the test with percent system losses set to 50. Uncheck the Include Solar Dash checkbox and start the simulation. Once we reach 10 a.m., we'll set the percent system losses back to 20, and also we can see that the solar dash is now in full sun, so we'll check the Include Solar Dash checkbox. Let's continue the run until solar noon when the sun is directly overhead, then rotate the vehicle to face east. At about 5 p.m., the dash begins to get shaded, so we'll uncheck the Include Solar Dash checkbox and continue the simulation until the end of the day. At the end of the run, you can see the calculated daily output is 4.46 kilowatt hours. The actuals data is 4.4 kilowatt hours, so pretty close. We can see based on the actuals graph that there were a couple drop-offs in the afternoon, likely due to passing clouds, which could explain the slight difference between 4.46 calculated value and the 4.4 actuals value. In addition, the shape of the output curve matches very closely between the calculator and the actuals, with both showing about a 30% drop in the morning before 10 a.m. Overall, these two sets of validation data demonstrates pretty good consistency between the calculated output and the actual vehicle solar performance. You can see that the calculator also outputs the daily miles generated using the target vehicle efficiency number of 10 miles per kilowatt hour and supports their stated goal of up to 40 miles per day with solar charging. We will know for sure if this 10 miles per kilowatt hour is accurate once Aptera Motors releases their validated efficiency numbers in the future. For now, though, you can use the Aptera Solar Calculator to estimate how the vehicle will perform at your location for best-case cloud-free conditions, or to optimize parking scenarios anywhere you go. One last tip. If you want to use the Aptera Solar Calculator on your smartphone, it will run, but you'll find the screen a little cramped. To accommodate this, I suggest going first to the bottom of the controls pane and uncheck all the boxes for the power output chart. This will hide the chart from the screen and make it easier to see the visualization window. So there you have it. Visit experienceaptera.com to try out the calculator, and while you're there, check out the rest of the site to learn more about the revolutionary Aptera Solar electric vehicle. Enjoy!